The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, every tick of the clock amplifying the dread that had settled deep in my bones. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile glow on the polished wood of the benches, each occupied by silent spectators. My family. They sat there, united against me, their faces masks of righteous indignation, or perhaps something more sinister, something akin to satisfaction. They truly thought I was going to crack. They believed they had finally cornered me, silenced me for good. But beneath the surface of my carefully composed exterior, a storm was brewing, a tempest of fury and a burning desire for retribution that would soon engulf them all. If you have a brother or sister who you would literally do anything for, subscribe right now and share this story. My name is Stephanie, and for years I had dedicated myself to the law, working tirelessly to build a reputation as a fierce advocate for justice. I poured my heart and soul into every case, fighting for the underdog, the voiceless, the forgotten. My brother, Mark, had always been envious of my success. He'd pursued a different path, one paved with shortcuts and dubious ethics, and his career had stalled, mired in mediocrity. Instead of celebrating my accomplishments, he harbored resentment, a simmering jealousy that festered beneath a veneer of familial affection. My parents, always quick to take his side, fueled his sense of entitlement, creating a toxic dynamic that had plagued our family for years. The breaking point came when I refused to compromise my integrity to help Mark out of a legal jam of his own making. He'd gotten himself tangled in a web of shady business dealings, and he expected me to use my skills to extricate him, consequences be damned. When I refused, citing my ethical obligations, he unleashed a torrent of verbal abuse, accusing me of abandoning him in his time of need. That's when the threats started. Vague at first, but growing in intensity. He promised that I would regret my decision, that he would make sure I paid the price for my loyalty to the law over my own family. I dismissed them as empty bluster, the desperate rantings of a man backed into a corner. How wrong I was. The official complaint filed against me with the state bar was a masterpiece of fabricated evidence and twisted half-truths. My family claimed that I had been offering legal advice to friends and neighbors without a license, engaging in the unauthorized practice of law, and jeopardizing the public trust. It was a blatant attempt to discredit me, to ruin my career, and to humiliate me in front of my peers. The charges were baseless, easily disproven with a cursory examination of the facts. But the damage had been done. The accusation alone was enough to trigger an investigation, to cast a shadow of doubt over my professional reputation. I was suspended pending the disciplinary hearing, forced to put my life on hold while I fought to clear my name. The injustice of it all was staggering. To be betrayed by my own family, to have my integrity questioned by the very people who were supposed to love and support me, was a blow that nearly brought me to my knees. They reveled in my misfortune, basking in the glow of their perceived victory. They saw me as weak, vulnerable, an easy target ripe for the taking. But they underestimated my resolve, my unwavering commitment to the truth, and my willingness to fight back against those who sought to destroy me. I would not let them win. I would not let them silence me. I would expose their lies, clear my name, and make them pay for their treachery. The day they came for me was the day they signed their own destruction. The person I trusted most was one of them. The suspension was a brand on my soul, searing itself into every aspect of my life. Sleepless nights became my unwelcome companions, the rhythmic ticking of the clock in my bedroom a constant reminder of the time slipping away, time I couldn't spend fighting for my clients, time I couldn't use to rebuild my shattered reputation. Every shadow seemed to whisper accusations, every ringing phone threatened to deliver another blow. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, to project an image of unwavering confidence, but the weight of the injustice was crushing me. My once organized apartment became a chaotic mess of legal documents, scribbled notes, and empty coffee cups, each a testament to my frantic attempts to find a crack in their airtight facade. I replayed every conversation, every interaction, searching for a clue, a mistake, anything that could prove my innocence and expose their lies. But they had been meticulous, covering their tracks with the precision of seasoned criminals. My friends and colleagues, once eager to seek my counsel, now avoided me, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and apprehension. The whispers followed me, a constant hum of doubt and speculation that eroded my confidence and fueled my anxiety. I reached out to my mentors, hoping for guidance, for reassurance that I could weather this storm, but even they seemed hesitant, their words carefully chosen, their support tempered with a palpable sense of caution. The isolation was suffocating, the feeling of being alone in the face of such overwhelming adversity, a burden I struggled to bear. I attempted to reason with my parents, to appeal to their sense of fairness, to remind them of the years of love and loyalty I had shown them, but their hearts were hardened, their minds poisoned by Mark's manipulations. They refused to listen, their faces etched with a chilling indifference that sent a shiver down my spine. They had chosen their side, and I was now the enemy. The financial strain of the suspension began to take its toll. My savings dwindled, my bills piled up, and the fear of losing everything I had worked so hard to achieve became a constant source of dread. I considered selling my apartment, downsizing my life, anything to alleviate the pressure, but the thought of giving up, of admitting defeat, was unbearable. I refused to let them break me, to strip me of my dignity and my sense of self-worth. I would fight back, no matter the cost. I started to see a therapist, hoping to find a way to cope with the stress, the anxiety, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal. She helped me to understand the dynamics of my family, the roots of their animosity, and the patterns of behavior that had contributed to this crisis. But understanding the problem didn't solve it. It merely gave me a framework for understanding the depth of their depravity. The disciplinary hearing loomed, a dark cloud on the horizon, threatening to consume me entirely. I knew that I had to find a way to expose their lies, to present irrefutable evidence of my innocence. But time was running out, and the odds were stacked against me. The despair was a heavy cloak that threatened to suffocate me. My brother and parents thought they had won. They truly thought I was defeated. They were wrong. The morning of the disciplinary hearing dawned gray and oppressive, mirroring the storm inside me. I stared at my reflection, barely recognizing the woman staring back. Hollow eyes, pale skin, and the faint tremor in my hands told the story of weeks of relentless stress and sleepless nights. It felt like I was walking to my own execution. The hearing room was even more sterile and imposing than I remembered, filled with stern faces and the hushed whispers of judgment. My family sat in the front row, their expressions a mixture of smug satisfaction and thinly veiled contempt. Mark offered a barely perceptible smirk, a silent acknowledgement of his victory. As the proceedings began, I felt myself shrinking, the weight of the accusations crushing me. The evidence against me, though fabricated, was presented with such skill and conviction that even I began to doubt my own sanity. My lawyer, a seasoned professional, fought valiantly, but he was fighting a losing battle. The deck was stacked against me, the truth buried beneath layers of lies and deceit. The bar committee members listened intently, their faces impassive, betraying no hint of their thoughts. I tried to maintain eye contact, to convey my innocence with my gaze, but their eyes remained cold and distant. As the hours dragged on, my hope dwindled, replaced by a gnawing sense of despair. I could feel my career, my reputation, my entire life slipping away. The final blow came when my own father took the stand. He looked me in the eye, his face devoid of emotion, and delivered a carefully rehearsed testimony that painted me as a reckless, unethical attorney who had betrayed the trust of her family and her profession. His words were like knives, each one piercing my heart, severing the last threads of hope that I had been clinging to. In that moment, something inside me shattered. The years of love, loyalty, and sacrifice meant nothing. They were willing to sacrifice me to protect Mark, to preserve their twisted version of family harmony. As I sat there, listening to the lies being spun, I felt a profound sense of detachment. The room seemed to fade away, the voices became muffled, and I was left alone in a dark, silent void. It was then, in that moment of utter despair, that I realized I had reached my breaking point. They had taken everything from me, stripped me of my dignity, and left me for dead. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated my capacity for resilience. They thought they had broken me, but they had only hardened my resolve. They thought they had silenced me, but they had only fueled my rage. The injustice of it all ignited a fire within me, a burning desire for retribution that would consume everything in its path. I would not let them win. I would not let them destroy me. I would rise from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever before. I walked out of the hearing room a broken woman, stripped of my career, my reputation, and my family's love. The city lights blurred through my tears as I wandered aimlessly, the weight of my despair threatening to pull me under. I found myself on a bridge, staring into the dark, swirling water below. The thought of simply letting go, of ending it all, flickered through my mind. It would be so easy, so peaceful, to escape the pain, the humiliation, the relentless torment. But then, I saw my reflection in the water, a distorted image of the woman I once was. And in those hollow eyes, I saw a spark of defiance, a refusal to be defeated. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. I would not let them win. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me destroyed. I would fight back, not with anger or emotion, but with cold, calculated precision. I turned away from the edge, a newfound sense of purpose hardening my gaze. The old Stephanie was gone, replaced by someone colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. I spent the next few days in a haze of grief and anger, isolating myself from the world, shutting out all contact with friends and colleagues. I replayed the hearing in my mind, dissecting every moment, every word, searching for clues, for weaknesses. I realized that their biggest mistake was their arrogance. They were so confident in their ability to deceive, so certain of my defeat, that they had become careless. They had left a trail of breadcrumbs, subtle inconsistencies and contradictions that, if pieced together, could expose their lies. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies, people I could trust, people who believed in me. I reached out to a former colleague, a brilliant investigator named Sarah, whom I had helped in the past. I explained my situation, laying bare the details of the betrayal and the fabricated evidence. To my relief, she didn't hesitate to offer her support. She believed in me, she said, and she was willing to do whatever it took to help me clear my name. Together, we began to unravel the tangled web of lies, meticulously gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and uncovering the truth that my family had tried so hard to conceal. It was a slow, painstaking process, but with each new discovery, my resolve grew stronger. I started to see a path forward, a way to expose their treachery and reclaim my life. Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable. I smiled. I acted broken, but I was recording everything. I needed to follow the money to reveal the full extent of Mark's illegal activities. It was a steep learning curve, but I was determined to master the skills necessary to expose their crimes. I consulted with a computer expert, learning how to recover deleted files, to track internet activity, and to protect my own data from being compromised. I knew that my family would stop at nothing to protect themselves, and I had to be prepared for anything. I even brushed up on the law regarding defamation and perjury, preparing for the inevitable legal battles that would follow once I exposed their lies. I discovered that Mark had a history of engaging in shady business dealings, and that he had a reputation for being ruthless and dishonest. Several of his former business partners had filed lawsuits against him, accusing him of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of contract. But each time he had managed to escape accountability, using his wealth and connections to silence his accusers. I realized that this was not the first time he had engaged in such behavior, and that he had likely been getting away with it for years. This realization fueled my determination to bring him to justice, not only for what he had done to me, but also for the harm he had inflicted on others. One evening, while reviewing the surveillance footage from my apartment, I noticed something odd. My mother was looking directly at one of the hidden cameras, a knowing smirk on her face. It was then that I realized that they knew I was recording them. They had been playing me all along, feeding me false information and manipulating me into thinking that I was one step ahead of them. I felt a surge of anger and frustration, but I quickly regained my composure. I couldn't afford to let them see that they had gotten to me. I had to remain calm, collected, and strategic. I decided to change my tactics, to use their knowledge of the surveillance to my advantage. I started to stage conversations, planting false information, and creating a false narrative that would lead them down a blind alley. I knew that they would be watching and listening, and I wanted to use that to manipulate them into making a mistake. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Every phone call, every visit, every interaction was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. I had to be constantly vigilant, always on guard, and never let my true feelings show. It was exhausting, but I knew that it was the only way to win. It was during one of these staged conversations, while lamenting my ruined career to my mother, that I let slip a carefully crafted lie. I had discovered a hidden clause in Mark's prenuptial agreement with his soon-to-be wife, a clause that would leave him penniless if he were ever found guilty of fraud. The look on her face was almost comical, a mixture of disbelief and panic. I knew I had them hooked. That night, Sarah called, her voice tight with excitement. She'd uncovered something huge. Remember those shell corporations Mark was using? One of them, supposedly defunct, had just received a massive wire transfer from an offshore account. And the beneficiary? None other than Judge Thompson, the very judge presiding over my disciplinary hearing. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Mark wasn't just trying to ruin me. He was buying the verdict. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface finally erupted. My vision blurred, the glass in my hand shattered, sending shards of crystal across the floor. This wasn't just about my career anymore. It was about justice, about exposing the corruption that had poisoned my family and threatened to destroy everything I held dear. We needed to move fast. We had the evidence. Now we needed to get it to the right people who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Sarah had a contact at the state attorney's office, a woman named Miss Evans, known for her integrity and her relentless pursuit of justice. We arranged a meeting, laying out all the evidence we had gathered, the financial records, the shell corporations, the wire transfer to Judge Thompson, the recorded conversations with my family, and the inconsistencies in their testimonies. Miss Evans listened intently, her expression growing more grim with each new revelation. When we were finished, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowed in thought. "This is explosive," she said. "If even half of this is true, it could bring down half the legal community." She paused, then looked at me with a steely gaze. "But it's also incredibly dangerous. Mark has powerful friends, and they won't hesitate to protect him." She agreed to take the case, but warned me that it would be a long and difficult battle. She needed time to verify the evidence, to build an airtight case that couldn't be dismissed or suppressed. In the meantime, she advised me to lay low, to avoid any contact with my family, and to let her handle everything. But I couldn't just sit back and wait. I needed to do something, to take control of the situation, to ensure that Mark and my family wouldn't escape justice. I decided to set a trap so elaborate, so irresistible, that they wouldn't be able to resist walking right into it. My plan was simple, yet audacious. I would lure them into a false sense of triumph, convincing them that they had finally broken me, that I was on the verge of giving up. Then, at the precise moment they felt most secure, I would spring the trap, exposing their lies and their corruption for all the world to see. I started by accidentally leaving a voicemail on my mother's phone, a voicemail filled with despair and self-pity. In the voicemail, I talked about how I was considering leaving the state, starting a new life under a different name, and how I was willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement, promising to never reveal the truth about what they had done. I even mentioned that I was willing to give them all the evidence I had gathered as a sign of good faith. I knew they would be listening, and I wanted them to believe that I was desperate, defeated, and ready to surrender. The next day, my father called, his voice dripping with false concern. He offered to meet me, to talk things over, and to help me move on with my life. I agreed to meet him at a secluded restaurant outside of town, a place where we wouldn't be overheard or interrupted. I knew they would be expecting me to be vulnerable, emotional, and easily manipulated, but I was prepared. I had spent weeks studying their behavior, anticipating their every move, and planning my every response. When I arrived at the restaurant, my father was already waiting, a smug look on his face. He greeted me with a hug, his eyes scanning me for any sign of weakness. I played my part perfectly, feigning sadness and resignation. I told him how sorry I was for causing so much trouble, how I regretted ever challenging Mark, and how I just wanted to put everything behind me. He listened patiently, nodding sympathetically, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. After a few minutes of small talk, he got down to business. He presented me with a non-disclosure agreement, a document that would legally bind me to silence. He also offered me a check, a generous sum of money in exchange for my cooperation. I pretended to hesitate, to weigh my options, before finally agreeing to sign the agreement. As I signed the document, I couldn't help but smile. They had fallen right into my trap. What they didn't know was that the pen I was using was a special pen, a pen that wrote with invisible ink. And what they also didn't know was that I had already made copies of all the evidence, and that those copies were safely in the hands of Miss Evans, the state attorney. The stage was set, the players were in place. It was time for the final act. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. The exact day they tried to end me, the disciplinary hearing commenced. I walked into that room not with the broken spirit they expected, but with the quiet confidence of someone who held all the cards. Mark was there, a smug look plastered on his face, along with my parents, radiating an aura of self-assuredness that made my skin crawl. Judge Thompson, the man who had already been paid to deliver a guilty verdict, sat at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral. The hearing began as expected, with Mark's lawyer presenting a carefully constructed narrative of my alleged misconduct, painting me as a reckless and unethical attorney who had abused my position for personal gain. The fabricated evidence was presented, the perjured testimonies were delivered, and the lies piled up, one after another. I sat there calmly, listening to their charade, my silence fueling their arrogance. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood up, my gaze sweeping across the room, making direct eye contact with each of my betrayers. I began by acknowledging the accusations, admitting that, on the surface, they appeared to be damning. But, I continued, appearances can be deceiving. I then introduced Miss Evans, the state attorney, who stepped forward and announced that she had obtained irrefutable evidence of a vast criminal conspiracy implicating Mark, my parents, and Judge Thompson in acts of fraud, bribery, and perjury. A hush fell over the room as Miss Evans presented the evidence, the financial records, the shell corporations, the wire transfer to Judge Thompson, the recorded conversations, and the signed non-disclosure agreement, now revealed to be written in invisible ink, with the original unsigned version safely in our possession. The smugness on Mark's face began to crumble, replaced by a look of disbelief and dawning horror. My parents' carefully constructed facade of concern shattered, revealing the cold, calculating individuals beneath. Judge Thompson's face turned ashen as he realized the magnitude of his predicament. The room erupted in chaos as Mark's lawyer frantically tried to object, but Miss Evans calmly presented a warrant for their arrest, effectively ending the hearing and beginning the process of bringing them to justice. As the authorities led them away in handcuffs, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The fallout was swift and devastating. Mark's reputation was ruined, his business empire crumbled, and his impending marriage was called off. He faced multiple felony charges, any one of which could land him behind bars for decades. My parents were ostracized by their social circle, their wealth and influence rendered meaningless in the face of their public disgrace. Judge Thompson was immediately removed from the bench, disbarred, and faced criminal prosecution that threatened to dismantle his career and his life. As for me, I was completely exonerated. My name was cleared, my reputation restored, and my career was back on track. The disciplinary charges were dropped, and I was reinstated with an apology. The sense of relief and vindication was overwhelming, but it was tempered by a profound sadness. The people who were supposed to love and support me had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way. and the scars of that betrayal would likely never fully heal. But I had survived. I had fought back, and I had won. In the end, they lost everything. I just smiled. The process wasn't easy, and at times the emotional toll was nearly unbearable. There were nights filled with doubt, fear, and the gnawing pain of betrayal, but I refused to let them break me. I channeled my pain into a laser-like focus, fueled by a burning desire for justice. The experience changed me, hardening my resolve and sharpening my instincts. I learned the true value of loyalty, the importance of trusting my gut, and the devastating consequences of unchecked greed and ambition. I also learned that sometimes the only way to fight evil is to meet it head-on, with unwavering determination and a willingness to do whatever it takes to protect yourself and those you care about. It was a dark chapter in my life, but it was also a defining one. It taught me the true meaning of resilience, the power of perseverance, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.